Hi guys, here we are today and we are going to talk about what it looks like to exceed mastery with detail.
So in this section of the rubric, we're going to be looking at how you can get better than just mastery.
So there's a few key words that deal with exceeds: substantial, specific, paraphrasing and using direct quotes, and then citations being used correctly and properly using a works cited.
So when you're looking at the mastery rubric versus the exceeds rubric, this is the four things that stand out. So we're going to talk to you in this video about how you can do these four things, and you need to do all of these things in order to move from mastery to exceeds.
So first, substantial evidence. Substantial evidence means a lot. We want to see a lot more evidence and more specific evidence within your paragraph. So to push yourself from mastery to exceeds, elaborate, lots of detail.
Yeah, so give multiple details, add the extras, explain. This is really more of a quantity here. So you have evidence, you get mastery,
You have lots of evidence,
you get
you get
exceeds. You
exceeds.
move towards exceeds. So let's give you an example of what mastery might look like. It's actually probably less than mastery, but just an example of what doesn't have a lot of evidence, and then an example of what does have exceeds evidence.
Okay, so we just took a portion of a paragraph. It says Shays' rebellion was necessary because things during the Articles of Confederation were bad. Farmers couldn't pay their bills because of inflation. Due to this, many farmers went to debtor's prison. This is really like kind of below basic, but the paragraph's not done. We're just taking out one little piece. So we're going to show you how you can elaborate on farmers couldn't pay their bills because of inflation to move your paper to exceeds.
So here's the same paragraph with
Ah,
substantial details. You see, we're still talking about inflation here, but inflation was caused by the lack of a gold-based currency. So we're telling why inflation is happening. As the national government printed more and more money, the value of that money went down since it wasn't really based on anything.
unfortunately, the Revolutionary War soldiers, they were paid in this type of money. As they returned to their farms, many were faced with harsh reality of that 7 years at war was really 7 years without a paycheck.
And then, so this is really explaining inflation, whereas in this particular section, we just mentioned inflation. Now we're getting more detail.
Now we know that you know what inflation means, or if I'm a reader and I don't know what inflation means, this paragraph explains it to me far better than that initial
So this is
statement.
substantial. And also, you notice I didn't finish the paragraph, but I mentioned the lack of trade was devastating to farmers as well. So instead of just mentioning one reason why farmers were suffering, I've now mentioned two reasons why farmers are suffering. I see dot, 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 dot here. I could go on and do the same part in yellow for trade as well, so I could explain it. So when we're looking back at this particular substantial evidence, multiple details, so more than just mentioning inflation, you're giving more.
Really
Add
talk
the
about it,
extras,
discuss it.
explain. All right, so let's move on to the next section here, which is being specific. To be specific, you have to use the fancy subject language vocab. You should, so if you're writing a history paper, you should sound like a historian.
Use the vocab words that we use in class. If we say Virginia Plan in class, you put Virginia Plan in your paper. If we say proportional representation and equal representation, you put proportional representation and equal representation into your paper. So whatever terms you hear us using in class, or whatever terms come up with whatever topic you're writing about, include those terms. You're writing a paper on wolves, talk about the details or the words that the scientists who are studying the wolves use on their paper.
And talk about the people and places directly. Don't say like, there was a guy who came up with a compromise.
Give a name.
His name was Roger Sherman. You know, like make sure you give the specific people, places, the details, and also make sure to give examples. So let's take a look at a paragraph that's not so specific versus a paragraph that is specific. So here is a more of a mastery or not yet type paragraph.
At the Constitutional Convention, there were many fights over representation in government. One of the many fights was between big states and small states. Big states wanted representation based on population. Small states wanted it based on each state having the same amount of votes. Great, I understand. You know what the Constitutional Convention was about as far as the fight between proportional and equal representation, but it's general. You don't say proportional or equal representation. You don't use key names and key people and names of plans. That's what we want to see you do.
So here's the example of a more of an exceeds type of paragraph. Notice that we've added in the Virginia Plan. It's specific. We use the word proportional representation. We used James Madison.
We used a number.
Yep, the population. So like this evidence is very specific, whereas this evidence
It's just general.
very general. So you have to be specific in order to achieve exceeds. Okay, paraphrasing and quotes. We have separate videos on how to do quotes and how to do paraphrasing. And if you used some quotes in your work or you paraphrased a little bit in your work, you might get mastery. We would expect to see both done frequently for
And
exceeds.
to exceeds,
It
right.
comes from the text. The paraphrasing and the quote comes directly from the text. And to exceed mastery in detail, we should see both throughout your paper, more than once.
Right.
So a couple
several
of
times
several
in
quotes,
each
several
paragraph.
paraphrases.
Even it's okay to paraphrase and quote within one paragraph.
So we have to see both. It couldn't just be one or the other, and it would have to be
Frequent
frequent.
throughout all your interwoven throughout your whole body of your paragraph.
And finally, let's talk about citations. In order to get exceeds for detail, you have to have accurate citations throughout your paper.
Using MLA format.
And citations,
just like we learned in library. Break the code.
Citations start with a works cited list. You have to have a works cited list before you can include citations. So this is a sample works cited list. I just copied it off someone's sample on the MLA website. But you see that this is in MLA format with the author's last name first, the thing that they wrote, the place, all the information that you get in a works cited list.
And we know that you know how to make a good works cited list. You've learned this in the library. You've learned this last year in 7th grade. We've gone over it in 8th grade. We know you know what works cited is. It's a very simple code. If you can't remember, it's just going to the library and asking Miss Garofalo or Mrs. Porter, hey, can I have the sample works cited? And then you're just plugging the information in to where it's supposed to be.
Yep. Then once you have your works cited list, an exceeds paragraph would actually cite the information throughout the document. So you see here, I wrote this and I used these people's names. They didn't talk about this, but it's just a sample. Without Roger Sherman, the Constitution would never have been passed. Sherman proposed the most crucial part of the Constitution, the Connecticut Compromise, which solved the main issues between large and small states. And this is paraphrased from the work of Dean on page 32, from the text that was written by Dean. This information came from. So I'm giving credit for Dean because this wasn't my research, that was his research.
It was just paraphrased. According to historian William Buchanan, Sherman's ability to articulate the need for a compromise was far superior to his idea of compromise. It was his salesmanship which really made the most difference. That's a direct quote, okay?
And after some discussion, both large and small states were in favor of Sherman's plan. And this quote, and along with this little piece, comes from the author Ebert on page 109. So all you do for a citation is you take the first word, so Dean and Ebert. This part came from Dean, this part came from Ebert. You use their name, and you just put the page number in parentheses, and the period goes afterwards.
Okay.
So in
Very
exceeds
simple.
and detail, I would see that when you quote or paraphrase information from a text, that you should give credit to the text within the document. That's why you need to have your works cited list done first, so you can do that. So back to the keywords. In order to make sure that you're exceeding mastery and detail, I should see substantial, specific, citations, and paraphrasing and quotes. So there's a lot. I think this is probably the hardest one to achieve exceeds on because there's lots of things you have to do. So good luck. We hope you can see growth and move to exceeds after watching this video.